Hey everybody, welcome to SLO City Church at home, online, wherever you are. My name is Brent, and I'm humbled to be one of the pastors here. We say this often because we want to make sure our focus is laser focused on what we're doing here. SLO City exists to help people like you and I find and follow Jesus. It's a place and a group of people where everyone is welcome. Nobody's perfect. We believe that anything is possible. Change is possible because there is hope for everyone. And Jesus is for you, not against you today. I'm really excited to jump into week 4 of our new series called where we have experienced the grace of going back and looking back on things. We've talked about restarting, regifting, blessed to be a blessing. Last week we talked about rebuilding faith. And today I want to talk about rediscovering, the gift it is to rediscover something. Have you ever rediscovered something? This past holiday, we were out in the garage and we were digging through all my old stuff from childhood. We found my old baseball cards, and then I found a Beanie Baby. I'm not too proud to admit it. I found a Beanie Baby that was given to me, I don't know, in middle school or high school, that I still had this thing. Do you remember that? They actually made a Netflix show called The Toys That Made Us, and talked about the Beanie Baby. And it sent us on this spin of rediscovering the Beanie Baby craze of the 1990s or whenever that was. Have you ever rediscovered something? Rediscovered an old toy like the Light Bright. I put this out on social media. Said, what was something that you've seen make a comeback or that you've rediscovered in your life? And here are some of the answers. Light Bright, Ninja Turtles, Glue-On Nails, Power Rangers. The Power Rangers are making a comeback. The hula hoop has been around forever. I don't know if it's ever been rediscovered, but it's just been here forever. Or have you ever rediscovered like an old movie like Harry and the Hendersons or It's a Wonderful Life? This Christmas, I gave my daughters a lava lamp just because I was in this nostalgic frame of mind of rediscovery. To rediscover something is special. It brings up memories. It brings up these things that you learned as a kid, and it triggers all these things. I remember several years ago, I got to walk through the house that I grew up in. And I remember like all these memories came flooding back as I'm like rediscovering what the sandbox that I grew up playing in looked like, and the fort that my dad and I built. And I walked into the kitchen and remember making chocolate chip cookies with my mom. And like there was this special experience I had in rediscovering the house I grew up in. Have you ever rediscovered something? I started thinking about that word, rediscover, this past Monday. As I was reading up on Martin Luther King Jr., I actually read one of his sermons that he preached in Detroit, Michigan on February 28th, 1954. Martin Luther King at that time was 25 years old. This was 2 years before the Montgomery bus boycott, and he hadn't really risen to the place of fame and honor that he is now, but he was preaching at his uncle's church, Second Baptist Church of Detroit, Michigan, and he preaches this sermon. And what was powerful is that he actually didn't talk about race or discrimination, segregation, or protest demonstrations or any of those things. But he had the crowd, this congregation, really moved as he was talking about remembering the principles and values that we are to hold on to in the church. And he said powerfully, if we are to go forward, if we are to make this a better world in which to live, we've got to go back. We've got to rediscover these precious values that we've left behind. I found that powerful. King, 25 years old, preaches to a congregation and says, if we are to make a difference in the world, if we are to go forward, if we are to progress, if we are to make the world a better place, we can't leave behind some of the principles, some of the values, some of the ethics, some of the guiding lines, some of the morals and directives and that the church has always had. We have to remember these principles. So today we are going to talk about the gift it is to rediscover. And I want to kind of zoom in on the church, and rediscover some of the beauty and the goodness of the church, of the community of God, of some of the principles, the guiding principles that guided this collection of people centered around Jesus. Why are we doing this? Why are we talking about rediscovering the goodness and beauty of the church? Because, as we talked about last week, it is really easy to forget some of the beauty, some of the transformative power of being together, gathering together, some of the goodness and love and mercy found in the church. See, the church is this thing that Jesus said he would build, and that nothing would come against. The gates of hell themselves, he would build his church and establish his church, and nothing would come against. It was something that was close to Jesus' heart. It was something that Jesus really cared about, and actually something that Jesus prayed for. Jesus prayed for the church. That's why we're looking at it. It's really easy to forget sometimes the power of the church. Jesus prayed for the church. So today, in an attempt to rediscover, like I rediscovered a Beanie Baby in my old house, and like Martin Luther King Jr. said, we need to rediscover some of the principles in the church. We're going to look at that, and we're going to do a couple things. Number one, we're going to look at Jesus' prayer for the church, and found in John chapter 17. Number two, we're going to look at the first church found in Acts chapter 2 and 3. And then number three, we're going to look at the impact of the church throughout history. And then we're going to wrap up with a practical encouragement for you and I and the church today and our church today in San Luis Obispo in an attempt to rediscover the beauty of the church. Now, quick disclaimer, and then we're going to get going. If you aren't a part of the church, if you've been hesitant to engage in the life of the church and you've just kind of watched the church, I get it. Like, I hope that today, though, in the midst of this, would paint a picture of the community that God desires to see formed, called the church. And I pray that you would see the beauty and the importance of being a part of this. Everybody's welcome. Nobody's perfect. We believe that change is possible. And there's hope for everyone. There's hope for the church. And we're going to rediscover it together. And so let's look at John chapter 17. See, Jesus actually, towards the end of his life, has this moment of prayer. It's called the high priestly prayer. Now, we get this prayer somehow, some way. Some scholars believe that Jesus repeated this prayer to his disciples. I kind of think that maybe he had some of his closest friends with him as he was praying, because the disciple named John writes this down in his gospel account. And Jesus is praying for the church. I want you to get this. He's praying for his friends, his disciples, those who followed him throughout his life, and he's praying for those that they would reach. Jesus prays this powerful prayer in John chapter 17. We're going to read a part of it here in just a minute, make some observations. But in this, he's praying for you, and he's praying for us. He's praying for he's praying for the church today. Let's look at what he says. John chapter 17, verse 14 and following. Let's read it. It says this, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them. Who's them? His disciples, those who have followed Jesus. For they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. My prayer, O Lord, is not that you take them, the church, out of the world, but that you protect them, disciples of Jesus, from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them, followers of Jesus, the church, into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may be truly sanctified. My prayer, O God, is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message. All believers everywhere, you and me, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that everyone around the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them, and I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I and them and you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and you have loved them even as you have loved me. Okay, that's a lot of back and forth and a lot of small thoughts and a lot of big, complex thoughts that we could probably preach sermons on and series on for the whole year, really. But Jesus has this moment of prayer before he's about to be arrested and crucified, where he is praying for his disciples, for those who would follow after him and those who would believe their message. That's you and me. If you're a follower of Jesus, that's you. Jesus prays for the church. And what does Jesus pray for? What does Jesus pray for? Number one, Jesus prays that the church, would be a group of people that connected to God's heart. He says, I pray that they are one with you as I am one with you, and that they are one with your heart, that we would connect deeply to God's heart. This is a principle and a value of the church, to be about the goodness of God, to connect to God in prayer and worship. And number two, he prays, I pray that they would connect to one another. I pray that there would be this unity as they connect to you, God, and a unity with each other, that though there are differences and though they're spread apart, that there would be this oneness that they would have this same principled mindedness, like the same direction, that they would pull together and they would connect to you, God's heart, and that they would connect to one another. Number three, that they would commit to grow more in the way of Jesus. He says, I've sanctified myself in the truth so that they would be sanctified. What does sanctified mean? It means to be kind of cleansed and set apart and consecrated and made holy. He says, my prayer is that they connect to God, connect to one another, and that they would commit to growing more like me, so that they would love others like me, and so that by the way that they connected to God, connected to one another, there was this unity and oneness and love of neighbor, love of the world, that the world would see that you sent Jesus to display your goodness and your grace and your love for the whole world. And this is Jesus' prayer, that the world would see the church and they would see that God has loved them and that God gives for them. This is Jesus' prayer. Jesus actually prays for the church that it would be one, that it would be unified, that it would be together, that there would be this connection and this commitment to God and to one another. It was close to Jesus' heart that the church got this. Jesus is then crucified. He's buried for 3 days. All hope seems to be lost, but then he rises from the grave. He walks out of the grave victorious, shows his nail-scarred hands to his followers, and they are filled with the Holy Spirit. And then we see the first church actually take Jesus' prayer, and we see Jesus' prayer answered in the first church. They were connected to the heart of God. They were committed to relationship and community with one another. They were committed to loving their neighbor, to loving the world around them, to sharing with those who had need. They were giving, they were meeting needs, they were opening up their homes, and they were sharing meals together. They were praying together. They were walking real hope into the world around them. Look at Acts chapter 2, verse 42 through 47. It says this, and they, the first church, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together. They had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day, the church continued to meet together. They gathered together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. They ate meals together with glad and sincere hearts. They praised God and enjoyed the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Jesus prayed for the church, and then the first church was born. And you saw that Jesus' prayer of connection to God, connection to one another, commitment to growing more like Jesus, and a love for the world literally became who they were. And they started to live their lives like this together. They're literally seeing people around them come to know Jesus just by the way that they loved God and loved one another, and they had this unity. And they found themselves in this thing that was called the ecclesia, the church, the gathering. And together they lived out this reality. And there was this ripple effect in the church. There was this ripple effect in the church where on the day of Pentecost, 3,000 people came and were baptized. And they came and said, I want to follow in the way of Jesus, and I want to learn this way. There was this ripple effect that the church had that I want to rediscover. Did you see on the news this past week that volcano that exploded in Tonga? almost halfway around the world, there was this volcano underwater on this island that erupts, and there's this explosion. The only way I really knew about this is because you and I, if we live in San Luis Obispo County, received a tsunami warning. Now, I was getting texts from, and Luke, our worship director, was getting texts from back east, and we were getting all of these all these people asking us, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I was like, "What in the world is going on?" And we turn on the news and we see there's this volcano that explodes 5,500 miles away. That caused this ripple effect, or this tidal wave, or this tsunami, or this effect in the water that actually ripples out 5,500 miles. And we saw a rise and the fall in the sea at Morro Bay, some damage down in Santa Barbara. It blew my mind. I'm just going to be real with you. It blew my mind, the effect of something that kind of dropped in the water 5,500 miles away. It's a ripple effect. Can I tell you, the first church, in an attempt to rediscover the goodness and beauty of the church, the first followers of Jesus had a ripple effect heard around the world and felt around the known world. As people gathered together and worshiped Jesus and loved one another and stepped into community and stepped into a commitment to grow more like Jesus, there were people who were coming into a saving relationship. There was a ripple effect on all humanity, and there was this incredible impact that was felt. Early on, the first followers of Jesus were gathering and growing, and the culture around them was ridiculously brutal. There was this power-hungry mentalities and of oppression, and people were being dehumanized, and there was division and violence and slavery. And this collection of people called the church, who trusted in and followed Jesus, hit the ground, and there was this ripple effect, and they made a difference. There are stories in ancient Greece and Rome that of these like high-class structures and systems, and where the rich and the educated and the beautiful and the noble were prized and elevated. The elites were worshipped almost, and they were taken care of, while the weak, while the poor, while the sick and marginalized were not valued at all. There's a writing of a Roman philosopher named Seneca who wrote, "We drowned children at birth when they are weak and abnormal." This is the ancient world. It wasn't uncommon. There was another letter discovered from a first century Roman soldier writing back home to his wife who was pregnant. It was a really nice letter, and he just casually, in this letter of catching up and talking about war and pillaging, different villages, writes to his wife, if the child is born and it's a boy, here's the name to give it. And if it's a girl, let her die of exposure. This was the reality of the world that the church first was born in. See, and this little movement of Jesus followers caused a ripple effect. They remembered what Jesus said when he said, "Let the little children come to me." And that all children and people and individuals were made in the image of God. And see, they began to take this seriously. They began to take this way seriously. And they would take in abandoned children and exposed children, the forgotten kids that were not even their own. They weren't even related to. And we read about how they would care for orphans, for those exposed, for those discarded. We read about a follower of Jesus named Benignus of Dijon, an epic name, who nursed, supported, and protected a number of deformed and crippled kids that had been saved from death after failed abortions or exposure, being left out in the elements. And this was so countercultural that Benignus was actually martyred for his actions, actually martyred for his following the way of Jesus and his growing the way of Jesus. But people like Benignus of Dijon and many others started orphan homes, places where children were valued, loved, rescued, belonged. This is the ripple effect and the beauty of the church. In the first church, there were widows, in the time of the first church, there were widows in the Roman Empire, and widows by law were fined by the empire. Seen as bad form to outlive your husband, they were often seen as just an economic drag on the empire. And so they were fine. They were cheated. They were taken advantage of, and then they were just discarded. But there was this little movement of Jesus followers that had this ripple effect. These followers of Jesus saw how Jesus treated widows. Remembers the widow who put in all she had out of her poverty and how he valued her and gave her dignity and love. And they said, we're going to live this way too. And so they began to take care of widows, to clothe them, feed them, take them in. There was this ripple effect of compassion. There are so many accounts throughout history, throughout the past 2,000 years of epidemics, pandemics during that time period, where sickness and illness was spreading like wildfire. And the people who were infected were just put out in leper colonies or put out to die by themselves, not allowed to be back in their homes or go to work. But there was this little movement of Jesus followers called the church, called Christians, who would care for their needs, who would take in the sick and care for them, treat their wounds, work towards healing because they had been transformed and healed by Jesus. In the fourth century, we find first hospitals begin, started by a follower of Jesus in a church named Saint Benedict. And Saint Benedict said this: the care of the sick is to be placed above and before every other duty, as if indeed Christ were being directly served and waiting on them. Saint Benedict, this way, bringing in the sick, caring for the widow, caring for the orphan, caring for the marginalized, seeing those in a world of brutality and oppression of power, had this ripple effect. It was in the church. It was in the church that value for women, that like chains were broken for slavery, that the oppressed found a place to be free and find hope. It was through the church. Over time, this way of Jesus oozed all over culture. In 1881, an organization was created to alleviate human suffering and provided relief for victims of disaster. And for its symbol, it chose a large red cross. We know that organization today as the Red Cross, has its roots in the church and in Christianity. We just passed a season called Christmas, and this holiday season where you walk into Target, you walk into Walmart, you walk into a store, and you'd see a person in a red jumpsuit ringing a bell. And we know this organization to care for the poor and to care for those in need. It's known as the Salvation Army, has its roots in the church and in Christianity. When you think about and when you hear about organizations like World Vision, the YMCA, Life Water here locally, Family Care Network, who cares for those in the foster care industry, when you hear of hospitals like St. Jude, Good Samaritan, St. Anthony, you are speaking of the movement of Jesus followers and the ripple effect of the Christian church throughout history. Through the church, there were movements to make a real difference on the principles of connecting to God's heart, committed to connecting in community, and committed to growing in their faith and looking more like Jesus, and then living out the love of Jesus in the world. And we have seen this remarkable tsunami that has been the impact of the church. There's this philosopher named Mark Nelson. And this is not to say that there wouldn't be any good things done throughout history without Christianity. There are many great organizations and great works throughout history and even today that were not necessarily Christian. But philosopher Mark Nelson writes this: if you ask, what is Jesus' influence on medicine and compassion, I would suggest that wherever you have an institution of self-giving for the lowly and for practical welfare of the lowly, schools, hospitals, hospices, orphanages for who will never be able to repay, this probably has its roots in the movement of Jesus. And that movement of Jesus was known as the ecclesia, as the church, as the collection of people that were centered on Jesus, committed to connecting to his heart, committed to community and connecting to one another, committed to growing more like Jesus, and then committed to loving the world like Jesus would love the world and living out their faith. I mean, this is a beautiful opportunity that you and I have to reflect and rediscover the beauty and the goodness of the church all came from the way of Jesus and a group of people who said, God, we want to be full of your presence. And we want to be this physical representation of your goodness and love on the world. We see that. Simple encouragement for the church, our church today. What if you and I went back? What if we maybe walked back or went back and rediscovered the beauty and the power of the church? Now, I know many of you, we talked about it last week, may have been hurt by the church, or maybe you have a bad experience in the church, or maybe you don't agree with everything that happens in the church, or maybe everything organized kind of spooks you out, or maybe, I don't know what your hang-up has been or what your perception has been of the church. But when we look back at Jesus' prayer, and when we look back at the first church, and when we look back at the impact of the church throughout history, we see these rediscovered principles of connecting to God's heart, connecting to one another in community, growing more like Jesus, loving the world around us. What would it look like for this church, for SLO City Church and the local church in San Luis Obispo, to get these principles and values right together, to get unity and oneness and mission and values and all of these ways of compassion and truth? And what would it look like if we were the people of God who connected to Jesus and then really knew one another, shared meals in our homes? What if we lived in a community and created these pockets of hospitality, of generosity, of love, of grace and truth, who spurred one another on to say, like, live out the way of Jesus in your workplace or in your school or in your neighborhood? What if we were this church that had our eyes so laser focused and fixed on Jesus, our risen Lord and Savior? What if we lived the way of Jesus and we're a little bit of light in the darkness, a little bit of hope in the midst of the fear, a little bit of peace in the midst of all of this panic? What if we went into every place and space sharing our faith, sharing the way Jesus has rescued us from ourselves and from all that? What if we went in and we rescued other people? What if we went in and we saw and sat with the marginalized, and we saw and took care of the sick and visited the prisoner and welcomed in the outcast, and we helped with rent and we mentored a student, we gave generously to the work of ministry in the city? What if we, you and I, rediscovered the beautiful principles of the church of Jesus Christ? What ripple effect would we see in this city when we were a part of that rediscovered community? What would it do around us? And let me say, I believe we're seeing this. I believe we're seeing glimpses of this in our church. We're seeing and experiencing something really special here. The ways that our church has grown, the baptisms that we've experienced, the way our church has jumped in and been generous in our community, and we've prayed for and rallied around individuals in real need, like Eddie. You just heard his story, walking out of a really difficult time and finding a church that prayed for him and supplied rent and medical assistance has actually opened his eyes to a God who loves him, values him, cares for him. This past Christmas, our church rallied around 22 families with real hope and real tangible needs met. The ways that you are and our church are visiting the sick and the shut-in, the way that we're seeing those who don't feel seen, the way that this is a place where people, I think, feel welcome. Everyone feels welcome and it's approachable, and where you're grieving with those who are experiencing grief, you're rejoicing with those in their celebration. We are seeing a glimpse of this rediscovered church that is centered on Jesus, connecting to God's heart, connecting to one another. You're opening up homes, rather than groups and homes. And I believe this is just the start of the ripple effect that you and I will see in this city for the glory of God and for the good of everyone, as we unite together in the goodness and beauty and power, transformative power that is the church. Not a business, not a program, although programs are great, not a service, although services are great, not a brand, although brands are fun, not any of those things. The community of faith, centered on Jesus, reliant and leaning into one another, sharpening one another, lifting one another up. I believe we will see a powerful ripple effect if you and I stepped into this. But where are you today? Do you find yourself hesitant? Do you find yourself leaning away? Do you find yourself in this weird relationship with the church and community, and you like Jesus, you just don't really like the people? And I get it, a group of imperfect people. But what if you and I took the step today to rediscover the beauty of the mess that is the church? It's not perfect, but it's Jesus' mechanism to show the world his goodness and his grace. What if we cleaned up some of the mess, and you and I refined some of the mess, and we stepped into it together, and we rediscovered the power, the light of the world sitting on a hill that Jesus says he prays for it, unity and oneness and all of those things? What if we rediscovered some of that? And then what if you and I chose to re-engage? We rediscovered and we re-engaged. Maybe for you, you join a group. Maybe for you, you sign up to serve. Maybe for you, you give financially to support ministry, the work of ministry through the local church. It matters. Maybe for you, you start a prayer meeting, or you host others in your home and you share meals and stories and life together. Maybe for you, you take the radical step of bringing goodness to your workplace, your neighborhood, your kid's school. You sign up to serve at school. Or maybe for you, you just take the step to commit to worship. Commit to growing more like Jesus. Commit to being a part of a community that wants to make Jesus known, to help people find and follow Jesus, a place where everyone's welcome. It takes all of us, not just a preacher on a Sunday, not just a worship song or two here or there, not just coffee or dinner. It takes you and I to be this church. May you and I rediscover the goodness of the church and re-engage. Maybe you've never engaged. Can I just tell you, you're invited to this life together. There is nothing like it. I put out a little Instagram question and said, what do you love about the church? The answers I got were, I've never found a place so welcoming and hospitable. I've never had another person said, I love that we get to learn about Jesus in community together. I love the way the church has made a difference in the community. I love a place where I can be myself and feel seen and feel loved. I love that the church is a place where people pray together and fight for each other and lift one another up when we're down. I love that the church will never fade away, but is a concrete place where we can get the goodness of God and where we can encourage each other. I hope that you and I find that today, to rediscover the beauty and goodness of the church and re-engage in the life of the church. God, we love you and we thank you. Thank you for your church. It's imperfect, it is flawed. But I pray as we look back on your prayer for the church, the first church, the impact of the church, and wrestle with some encouragements for the church today, that you would help us, that you would maybe give us courage to take a step, join a group, serve, find somewhere in the city, give, pray, host, share a meal. Help us to be the church, not just do church. We love you. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yeah, my name's Eddie Hernandez. I was born in Orange County, California. I've been in San Luis Obispo in the Central Coast for about almost about 9 years. I worked for Snyder & Sons Landscapes, a landscape company here in town, for the past 9 years prior to having a stroke in October. Well, yeah, I was working on a Friday morning, and I just started getting a headache, a mass headache, like a really mass headache, like the worst you could imagine. And we were working down on Monterey Street here, and I asked my friend, I go, dude, I don't think I'm gonna make it. You know, I feel like I'm gonna die right now, because I was like drenched in sweat, and yeah, the mass headache, so can you take me to the hospital? And luckily we were right by French, we didn't have to travel that far to get to a hospital. And yeah, from then on, I went out. I passed out, or they induced a coma. At some point, they induced a coma, you know, where I was in a coma for about almost 30 days. The doctors were telling them, my family and friends, that that he's either going to come out vegetable or maybe a little bit disabled, like really disabled, or dead, And miraculously, I believe by the prayers from my family, especially my mom, and then you guys, the church, that brought me back to life, and like I'm almost like feel like back to like normal, like nothing had ever happened. I feel pretty darn good, and I owe that to God and and all the prayers. It had to have been the prayers, Otherwise, without the prayers, I probably would have been dead. I think I would have died. So that was tough waking up, and not knowing what happened. I thought I had killed my son because I didn't know if he was because he's usually with me most of the time. And so I thought I had crashed. I didn't know I had forgotten what happened until my friend reminded me. He's like, "You don't remember what happened?" I'm like, "No." The headache you had, then it started coming back to me, and then slowly I came back to life. Oh man, my struggles have been a lot of addiction issues, alcohol, drugs, and that's what led to my stroke, was actually my drug abuse. I started going to the Alano Club soon right after I came out of the hospital. When I got back into town, it's where they have meetings, AA meetings, and that's so I can get sober, find you find a sponsor, you get sober like that, and so I've been going to several meetings a day and talking to a lot of people, making new friends, and which help you. They teach you about how to stay sober. I'm excited about getting my life going and seeing what's going to happen next, and just raising my kids. That's what I'm excited about the most, actually. That's my main goal, is for my children to look at me and for them to look up to me, and just to be a better person in general, without the drugs and without the alcohol, because that's that'll keep you down, that'll take you out. It was kind of a trip. It was kind of cool. I got a call from I'm pretty sure it was Jordan who called me when I was a random call I had my phone with me, and he had told me that the church was praying for me, and that he mentioned my story, or you guys mentioned my story to the church, and I got all the prayers, and that you guys had raised some money to help out with with whatever expenses I needed and then that's what got me back into my faith, and thinking about all right, I got to get my act together, because I need to live for my kids, and I just need to live for my kids and for myself. I'm not ready to die yet, but that it was a good wake up call for me, to get back into my faith, and to get back into at least coming to church and paying attention, and you know what I mean. It helps me a lot knowing that all you guys, I feel like I have an army behind, like a church army behind my back, to just praying. Just the prayers help. I know they help, because that's where, like I said before, that's what kept me got me back to life.